Hey, sixth graders, Mr. Slaby here. This is your first chapters Wednesday for Wednesday, December 2nd. We're into December, people. If you think about it, we have 20 days, I think, until we break again, and that's total. So 2.5, really 3 weeks. So we're coming down to it. Okay, so today, here's the book for today for first chapters. And by the way, I told you this is a light day, so the rest of you focus on getting your stuff done. I'm telling you, get your write like an author assignment in for anyone that hasn't. And if you feel like you still need to send me an email with a link to your document, do that, because that one will save your grade, every one of you. Okay, so this is today is a Red Pyramid. This is by a guy named Rick Riordan, who's interesting because I actually Rick Riordan wrote the Lightning Thief. I did not like him. I thought his writing was pretty bad, actually, and I love Greek myths, always have, and I did not like the Lightning Thief. However, I really like this series. So this is the Red Pyramid by him, and it's a different set of gods. In fact, if you think about the Greek gods, they're kind of over here, right? But these are Egyptian gods. That's who comes to play in this book, this whole series about all these Egyptian gods and their role to play in this story. So it's an excellent story, really fun. And it's an interesting book because it's written from two different, each chapter is a different perspective. The two kids in the story are Sadie and Carter. And Carter is, he's the first chapter, and it'll switch and it'll go to Sadie. So we get his perspective, her perspective, his perspective, her perspective. So it's kind of interesting. It doubles up sometimes, and you get the same, the same moment is a little different in their eyes. So here we go. Death at the Needle. Do. We only have a few hours, so listen carefully. If you're hearing this story, you're already in danger. Sadie and I might be your only chance. Go to school, find the locker. I won't tell you which school or which locker, because if you're the right person, you'll find it. The combination is 13, 32, 33. By the time you finish listening, you'll know what those numbers mean. Just remember, the story we're about to tell you isn't complete yet. How it ends will depend on you. The most important thing, when you open the package and find what's inside, don't keep it longer than a week. Sure, it'll be tempting. I mean, it will grant you almost unlimited power, but if you possess it too long, it will consume you. Learn its secrets quickly and pass it on. Hide it for the next person, the way Sadie and I did for you. Then be prepared for your life to get very interesting. Okay, Sadie is telling me to stop stalling and get on with the story. Fine. I guess it started in London, the night our dad blew up the British Museum. My name is Carter Kane. I'm 14 and my home is a suitcase. You think I'm kidding? Since I was 8 years old, my dad and I have traveled the world. I was born in LA, but my dad's an archaeologist, so his work takes him all over. Mostly we go to Egypt, since that's his specialty. Go into a bookstore, find a book about Egypt. There's a pretty good chance it was written by Julius Cain. You want to know how Egyptians pulled the brains out of mummies, or built the pyramids, or cursed King Tut's tomb? My dad is your man. Of course, there are other reasons my dad moved around so much, but I didn't know his secret back then. I didn't go to school. My dad homeschooled me, if you can call it homeschooling when you don't have a home. He sort of taught me whatever he thought was important. So I learned a lot about Egypt and basketball stats and my dad's favorite musicians. I read a lot too, pretty much anything I could get my hands on, from dad's history books to fantasy novels, because I spent a lot of time sitting around in hotels and airports and dig sites in foreign countries where I didn't know anyone. My dad was always telling me to put the book down and play some ball. You ever try to start a game of pickup basketball in Aswan, Egypt? It's not easy. Anyway, my dad trained me early to keep all my possessions in a single suitcase that fits in an airplane's overhead compartment. My dad packed the same way, except he was allowed an extra work bag for his archaeology tools. Rule number 1, I was not allowed to look in his work bag. That's a rule I never broke until the day of the explosion. It happened on Christmas Eve. We were in London for visitation day with my sister, Sadie. See, Dad's only allowed 2 days a year with her, one in the winter, one in the summer, because our grandparents hate him. After our mom died, her parents, our grandparents, had this big court battle with Dad. After 6 lawyers, 2 fistfights, and a near-fatal attack with a spatula, Don't ask. They won the right to keep Sadie with them in England. She was only 6, 2 years younger than me, and they couldn't keep us both. At least that was their excuse for not taking me. So Sadie was raised as a British school kid, and I traveled around with my dad. We only saw Sadie twice a year, which was fine with me. Shut up, Sadie. Yes, I'm getting to that part. See, he's in the moment talking to her. So anyway, my dad and I had just flown into Heathrow after a couple of delays. Heathrow is a very famous London airport. It was a drizzly, cold afternoon. The whole taxi ride into the city, my dad seemed kind of nervous. Now, my dad's a big guy. You wouldn't think anything could make him nervous. He has dark brown skin like mine, piercing brown eyes, a bald head, and a goatee, so he looks like a buff, evil scientist. That afternoon, he wore his cashmere winter coat and his best brown suit, the one he used for public lectures. Usually, he exudes so much confidence that he dominates any room he walks into. But sometimes, like that afternoon, I saw another side to him that I didn't really understand. He kept looking over his shoulder like we were being hunted. Dad, I said as if we were getting off the A40. As we were getting off the A40. What's wrong? No sign of them, he muttered. Then he must have realized he'd spoken aloud because he looked at me kind of startled. Nothing, Carter. Everything's fine. Which bothered me because my dad's a terrible liar. I always knew when he was hiding something, but I also knew no amount of pestering would get the truth out of him. He was probably trying to protect me, though from what I didn't know. Sometimes I wondered if he had some dark secret in his past, some old enemy following him, maybe, but the idea seemed ridiculous. Dad was just an archaeologist. The other thing that troubled me, Dad was clutching his work bag. Usually when he does that, it means we're in danger. Like the time gunmen stormed our hotel in Cairo. I heard shots coming from the lobby and ran downstairs to check on my dad. By the time I got there, he was just calmly zipping up his work bag while 3 unconscious gunmen hung by their feet from the chandelier, their robes falling over their heads so you could see their boxer shorts. Dad claimed not to have witnessed anything, and in the end, the police blamed a freak chandelier malfunction. Another time, we got caught in a riot in Paris. My dad found the nearest parked car, pushed me into the back seat, and told me to stay down. I pressed myself against the floorboards and kept my eyes shut. I could hear Dad in the driver's seat, rummaging in his bag, mumbling something to himself while the mob yelled and destroyed things outside. A few minutes later, he told me it was safe to get up. Every other car on the block had been overturned and set on fire. Our car had been freshly washed and polished, and several 20-euro notes had been tucked under the windshield wipers. Anyway, I'd come to respect the bag. It was our good luck charm. But when my dad kept it close, it meant we were going to need good luck. We drove through the city center, heading east toward my grandparents' flat. We passed the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, the big stone column in Trafalgar Square. London is a pretty cool place, but after you've traveled for so long, all cities start to blend together. Other kids I meet sometimes say, "Wow, you're so lucky you get to travel so much." But it's not like we spend our time sightseeing or have a lot of money to travel in style. We stayed in some pretty rough places, and we hardly ever stay anywhere longer than a few days. Most of the time, it feels like we're fugitives rather than tourists. I mean, you wouldn't think my dad's work was dangerous. He does lectures on topics like, can Egyptian magic really kill you? And favorite punishments in the Egyptian underworld, and other stuff people wouldn't care about. But like I said, there's that other side to him. He's always very cautious, checking every hotel room before he lets me walk into it. He'll dart into a museum to see some artifacts, take a few notes, and rush out again like he's afraid to be caught on the security cameras. One time when I was younger, we raced across the Charles de Gaulle airport to catch a last-minute flight, and Dad didn't relax until the plane was off the ground. I asked him point blank what he was running from, and he looked at me. I just pulled the pin out of a grenade. He looked at me like I just pulled a pin out of a grenade. Hey, there's a simile. For a second, I was scared he might actually tell me the truth. Then he said, "Carter, it's nothing," as if nothing were the most terrible thing in the world. After that, I decided maybe it was better not to ask questions. My grandparents, the Fausts, live in a housing development near Canary Wharf, right on the banks of the River Thames. The taxi let us off the curb, and my dad asked the driver to wait. We were halfway up the walk when Dad froze. He turned and looked behind us. "What?" I asked. Then I saw the man in the trench coat. He was across the street, leaning against a big dead tree. He was barrel-shaped with skin the color of roasted coffee. His coat and black pinstripe suit looked expensive. He had long braided hair and wore a black fedora pulled down low over his dark round glasses. He reminded me of a jazz musician, the kind my dad would always drag me to see in concert. Even though I couldn't see his eyes, I got the impression he was watching us. He might have been an old friend or a colleague of Dad's. No matter where we went, Dad was always running into people he knew. But it did seem strange that the guy was waiting here, outside my grandparents', and he didn't look happy. Carter, my dad said, go on ahead. But get your sister. I'll meet you back at the taxi. He crossed the street toward the man in the trench coat, which left me with two choices: follow my dad and see what was going on, or do what I was told. I decided on the slightly less dangerous path. I went to retrieve my sister. Before I could even knock, Sadie opened the door. Late as usual, she said. She was holding her cat, Muffin, who'd been a going-away gift from Dad 6 years before. Muffin never seemed to get older or bigger. She had fuzzy yellow and black fur like a miniature leopard, alert yellow eyes, and pointy ears that were too tall for her head. A silver Egyptian pendant dangled from her collar. She didn't look anything like a muffin, but Sadie had been a little when she named her, so I guess you have to cut her some slack. Sadie hadn't changed much either since the last summer. As I'm recording this, she's standing next to me, glaring, so I'd better be careful how I describe her. You would never guess she's my sister. First of all, she'd been living in England so long, she has a British accent. Second, she takes after our mom, who is white. So Sadie's skin is much lighter than mine. She has straight caramel-colored hair, not exactly blonde, but not brown, which she usually dyes with streaks of bright colors. That day it had red streaks down the left side. Her eyes are blue. I'm serious. Blue eyes, just like our mom's. She's only 12, but she's exactly as tall as me, which is really annoying. She was chewing gum as usual, dressed for her day out with Dad in battered jeans, a leather jacket, and combat boots, like she was going to a concert and was hoping to stomp on some people. She had headphones dangling around her neck in case we bored her. Okay, she didn't hit me, so I guess I did an okay job of describing her. Our plane was late, I told her. She popped the bubble, rubbed Muffin's head, and tossed the cat inside. Gran, going out! From somewhere in the house, Grandma Faust had said something I couldn't make out. Probably, don't let them in! Sadie closed the door and regarded me as if I were a dead mouse her cat had just dragged in. So, here you are again. Yep. Come on then, she said. Let's get on with it. That's the way she was. No, hi, how have you been the last 6 months? So glad to see you or anything. But that was okay with me. When you only see each other twice a year, it's like you're distant cousins rather than siblings. We had absolutely nothing in common, except our parents. We trudged down the steps. I was thinking how she smelled like a combination of old people's house and bubble gum when she stopped so abruptly. I ran into her. Who's that? She asked. I'd almost forgotten about the dude in the trench coat. He and my dad were standing across the street next to the big tree having what looked like a serious argument. Dad's back was turned so I couldn't see his face, but he gestured with his hands like he does when he's agitated. The other guy scowled and shook his head. Dunno, I said. He was there when we pulled up. He looks familiar. Sadie frowned like she was trying to remember. Come on. Dad wants us to wait in the cab, I said, even though I knew it was no use. Sadie was already on the move. Instead of going straight across the street, she dashed up the sidewalk for a half block, ducking behind cars, then crossed to the opposite side and crouched under a low stone wall. She started sneaking toward our dad. I didn't have much choice but to follow her example, even though it made me feel kind of stupid. 6 years in England, I muttered, and she thinks she's James Bond. He's a famous spy, if you don't know that. James Bond, look him up. Sadie swatted me without looking back, and I kept creeping forward. A couple more steps, and we were right behind the big dead tree. I could hear my dad on the other side saying, Have to, Amos. You know it's the right thing. No, said the other man, who must have been Amos. His voice was deep and even, very insistent. His accent was American. If I don't stop you, Julius, they will. The Père Ankh is shadowing you. Sadie turned to me and mouthed the words, Père what? I shook my head and was just as mystified. Let's get out of here, I whispered, because I figured we'd be spotted any minute and get in serious trouble. Sadie, of course, ignored me. They don't know my plan, my father was saying. By the time they figure it out, And the children? Amos asked. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. What about them? I've made arrangements to protect them, my dad said. Besides, if I don't do this, we're all in danger. Now back off. I can't, Julius. Then it's a duel you want? Dad's tone turned deadly serious. You never could beat me, Amos. I hadn't seen my dad get violent since the great spatula incident, and I wasn't anxious to see a repeat of that, but the two men seemed to be edging toward a fight. Before I could react, Sadie popped up and shouted, Dad! He looked surprised when she tackle-hugged him, but not nearly as surprised as the other guy, Amos. He backed up so quickly he tripped over his own trench coat. He'd taken off his glasses. I couldn't help thinking that Sadie was right. He did look familiar, like a very distant memory. I must be going, he said. He straightened his fedora and lumbered down the road. Our dad watched him go. He kept one arm protectively around Sadie and one hand inside the work bag slung over his shoulder. Finally, when Amos disappeared around the corner, Dad relaxed. He took his hand out of the bag and smiled at Sadie. Hello, sweetheart. Sadie pushed away from him and crossed her arms. Oh, now it's sweetheart, is it? You're late. Visitation day is nearly over. And what was that about? Who's Amos and what's the Père Ankh? Dad stiffened. He glanced at me like he was wondering how much we'd overheard. It's nothing, he said, trying to sound upbeat. I have a wonderful evening planned. Who'd like a private tour of the British Museum? Okay, so we know there's an explosion coming. We also know that some bad stuff's happened, and so we get this whole thing's a flashback. This whole story is like before the first page of this book. So go to Schoology, answer a simple question, and we'll see you all on Thursday.